Well, good morning, councillors and staff. Welcome, and board members who are here today to day 2 of annual plan deliberations. The meeting is resumed, and I'd like to remind everyone to please turn on their microphones when they are speaking. Also, welcome to those who might be watching online. Firstly, I have apologies from Her Worship the Mayor, also apologies for lateness from Councillors Bentley and Sturt, and Councillor Maxwell, apology for a partial absence. So could I have a mover that the apologies be accepted? Moved Councillor Hunt, seconded Councillor Gould. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. I'll now call on the Chief Executive and Thomas to give us a PowerPoint to set the scene for where we've got to today.
Well, good morning, councillors. Look, Thomas and I just want to spend a few minutes just giving a bit of background and setting up some context, if you like, for the discussions today. So what we want to do is just to recover, if you like, the context for decision making, the background, the environment that we're working in. We want to look at making sure that we give you a suite of options for decisions or how to approach decisions. And lastly, we want to give you an update on the financial position against the annual plan given the decisions you've already made today. Look, and the reason we're giving this PowerPoint is that yesterday I sensed a little bit of frustration around some members with respect to the advice that the staff team was actually trying to provide. And what we thought the best thing to do would be to start off today to actually be quite clear about our intent and the advice that we're trying to provide to you to assist you through the decision-making process. I just want to reinforce that our role effectively is twofold. We want to actually help you make decisions, and secondly, we want to provide you with advice as to the long-term implications of those decisions that you are making. There we go. Now, this is a graph that Thomas put up yesterday, and I don't want to look at the 217 forward bars. I want to just again reinforce the bars that run from 2008 through to 2014. What happened over that period, you can see, is effectively debt doubling. And the reason it doubled was a focus, I believe, within the annual plan process of looking at decisions in isolation without looking at the long-term implications of those decisions. And so one of the clear roles that staff have in advising you is to actually draw your attention to those long-term implications of any decision that is actually made. The other issue that I think that lies in here is actually taking decisions in isolation. In other words, looking at a particular decision without actually considering the wider implications of that in terms of effects that it actually may have. And I'll come back to that in a moment. So what is the context for decision making today in the annual plan? Well, this graph provides you with a bit of a view as to where Rotorua sits with regards to rating. What it demonstrates effectively is that we, and you can see Rotorua sitting on that green bar mid-pack down the way there, effectively our rates are comparable to the general rates of other jurisdictions. Some rating levels are lower, and you can see Invercargill, for example, sitting at that extreme end. Some are though higher, and you can see some of the city councils sitting down below. So we sit effectively in that mid-pack position. I think one of the interesting things is that this is just a fairly crude measure of looking at general rates and on as though all things are equal. Now, further up, you'll see Tauranga. Now, if you just take the blue bar, the ostensible rating level in Tauranga, you would say, gosh, Tauranga's rates are probably lower than Rotorua. But the problem is, of course, is that Tauranga do not rate for refuse collection. So if you just add on the cost of refuse onto the Tauranga rates, that's the little red box that's added on to the end there, all of a sudden Tauranga rates are very, very similar, in fact, to Rotorua. Now that's another issue when you look at trying to compare Invercargill with Rotorua. You've got to actually say that Rotorua has got things like a large aquatic centre, a museum and so forth, and does that equate to the same thing for Invercargill? So not all jurisdictions are equal is the key issue that I would argue. And what we have is a current rating level which is directly comparable with other councils across the country. We don't stand out as being unique in any way whatsoever. Equally so, the current context of our debt levels. At the moment, if you look at the short term, our annual plan was to look at being 3.5 million above our LTP for the financial year, but that still has a debt headroom or debts $25 million below our debt ceiling. In other words, there's still headroom within that. So there is no overall, you'd actually have to say there is not overall concern in that we're not getting close or not about to go above our debt ceiling. So our debt level is overall, you'd have to conclude, is a prudent level. And that's particularly the case when you look at the longer term. The longer term shows debt decreasing and being 75 million below the debt ceiling at the end of the LTP period. Now, these are the sort of judgments that when we had our people come in to look at our credit rating, FISC, what they looked at were these sort of measures to say, well, is debt unreasonable at the moment? Not really. What will it be in the future? It'll be considerably improved. So there was overall a decision to say that this is not a bad position. Now, why have I covered these two slides with you? Well, the general view I wanted to convey to you is that unlike 2013, 2014, we were in a highly constrained environment. An environment where we were absolutely cutting all cost and we were absolutely cutting a lot of our capital program. Today, when you're making deliberations, you're able to look at this position and say, over the last 3 years, this council has moved into a considerably improved position to a point now you are able to make some minor changes that will allow you to respond to requests from the community, which may incur some small additional costs, and you are able to do that. And I think that's a much different position from what we were in 2013 and 2014. So the options for decision making. Well, unfortunately, this is just not an easy yes-no binary equation that you can respond to a request in. You've got a number of things that you can do and a number of things to consider. The first, and this is something I touched on yesterday, is our significance policy. If a submitter comes in asking for a significant new activity to be introduced, it may be that you look at it and say, this has got broad implications for our community, and it may be that over the LTP period, it has also got some significant implications. Remember that something like $100,000 of increased debt in 1 year, it doesn't sound a lot, but that translates to 1 million increased debt over 10 years. Now that's where things can, although they look in the short term small, in the longer term they can actually have a much greater impact. One of the things, though, is that that doesn't mean that just because something triggers a significance policy that the answer automatically is no. Because what you can always do is to direct us to actually undertake within this financial year a intense community consultation on a particular matter. So if there was something that you saw within the submissions that resonated with you and you felt was critically important that you wanted to respond to within the year, then we can simply undertake a statutory consultation process within this year prior to the LTP. The other thing that you can do, of course, is that if it doesn't trigger the significance policy, you can directly make the decision to fund it, and that's what you did yesterday with regards to the kilometre of rural road seals. That's something that was under the significance policy threshold and something that you could decide to do, and that's exactly what you did yesterday. The other thing, though, is that if you are nevertheless wanting to support something but are uncertain about how this is going to fit into the longer term, then fundamentally your option is to look at asking staff to look at options for inclusion in the LTP. So that's if you like the fourth option. 5 and 6, options 5 and 6, are options for you to actually say, look, we want to be able to support this. We'd like to see this somehow considered in this year if it was possible. And there's two ways that can happen. One is that you can refer it to a business unit. So, for example, if there was a footpath extension, let's say, as an example, you could say, we don't want to put this in as an extra. We don't want to increase our debt levels for this. But it may be that when the business unit looks at it, staff may be able to accommodate it through reprioritisation of the current work program. So that's something a business unit can do. Alternatively, the same thing can be done within a portfolio. So if you wish to be involved in that reprioritisation and you wish to have oversight of it, you can actually refer that and ask staff to consider this within a portfolio. The difference between the two, if it's in a business unit, the business unit will consider it and report back to the whole of council. If it's in a portfolio, your portfolio lead will be involved in that reprioritisation and have direct control of how that is actually shaped. The seventh option is that you can also ask us to say you want to support this, you recognise that there's a potential, a particular item, you want to actually have staff bring back a way of doing this, but you do not want any cost to be incurred. The only way we can do that is for staff to look at our existing service levels, to look at our existing activities and say, here, council, are some options for you to fundamentally reduce cost. We can always do that. If you want us to go back and revisit our service levels or our current cost base, then we can always be directed to do it, and we will always do that and bring back to you options for things for you to consider. What I would say, though, is that this organisation is operating a very lean, tight budget. We don't have room to simply build new costs in. If we build in something new, something else has to go. And so what we'd be bringing back to you are the options that you might consider for removing services or whatever. The last option, of course, is simply to note the submission, to recognise to the submitter that it has value, but effectively you're unable to consider it within the annual plan process. So those are the options for decisions as you go through the many submissions that you have before you today. Now I'll ask Thomas just to talk to this rather detailed slide, but effectively the intent is to give you a bit of an update about where we are with respect to yesterday's deliberations.
Take questions on your slides first.
Happy to do that.
Just before Thomas commences, has anyone got any questions of Jeff's slides so far? Yeah.
You mentioned, Jeff, that if we decide, is that we collectively, the council, or we individually as a councillor decide we want something further work done on? I'd just like clarification on whether it one person can say, I really want, a skyscraper to be examined as a feasibility, or whether it's a discussion we have collectively around the table and we all agree that we think it's got merit to go further.
Well, I think that the answer to that is that I would most definitely urge you as a council body to consider requests such as that. The issue being is that quite often what may look like a small request can turn into considerable many hours of staff work, and potentially further than that, some external advice even being sought. I wouldn't want us to do so lightly, and therefore when we're considering requests such as the building of the new skyscraper, that this is actually a council direction as opposed to the direction of an individual.
Yeah, and Una will cover that off after these two presentations, just on the approach we'll take with decision making today. Councillor Gould, you had a question.
Much. Thank you, Jeff, for your presentation. With number 8, note submission, does that mean when a submitter gets his submission noted, it can't be brought back to council?
Well, effectively, I think what you're saying at that particular point is that whilst the submission has value, it would not be considered within the annual plan round. Now, it may be that when staff, that's a very general comment obviously, and we wouldn't just say simply back to a submitter that your submission was noted. What we would want to do is to provide some context to the decision, encourage them to potentially reconsider their submission in the LTP, to potentially even work with staff further to explore options. But effectively, all of those avenues, what they don't mean is that the submission will result in a change within the current annual plan.
So Una again will cover that off, but you'll see a column on your spreadsheet there of comments, and that'll form the basis of the response, where it's just noted it may well be a work in progress that's already underway. I just had one question, Jeff, and that was on the comparative rate of levels and just comparing Tauranga with Rotorua. Does that take account of the fact that Tauranga meters separately on a separate invoice for water as well?
That does take that into account. Yep. Thanks. So what I've got here, and I've got it on my laptop, which I'll update as we go through this process, is just a very simple spreadsheet, pretty much showing a summary of the underlying annual plan with regards to the cash that's being generated from operations and how we apply it, and then just showing the impact of the adjustments that it has through to what a final draft annual plan would look like. And so the column on the left in blue is a summary of what we went out with in our submissions. And so if I just work through it quickly for you to get a context of it, was that we had total revenue of about 116 million. We had operating expenditure of 108 million, and so we had a surplus of $8 million. Now, that doesn't mean that we only had a surplus of $8 million worth of cash. So within that, we add back our non-cash expense of depreciation, and so from that, we're actually generating $33 million of free cash flow that's available for to fund operations. Now, councillors, if you do try and compare this against what I've given you before, I have rounded, so just to keep this simple, but you'll see that the numbers are quite similar. On top of that, we get $1 million of property sales. So what we're saying is we've got $34 million of cash left at the end of paying all our operational bills, our staff, our other contractors for capital works, and we're proposing to spend $39.5 million. So obviously there's a shortfall there of $5.5 million. The next column there is the SHIMPAC one. So I've shown you the impact of what happens when we remove $2 million. So effectively, all it does is we've reduced capital spend, and therefore we reduce the borrowing required, because it has had no impact up top with regards to our operating expenditure or our rating revenue. And the reason being is that from this, we clearly have more expenditure, money going out in total, than money going in, hence the need to borrow. So therefore, if we just reduce a capital expense item, obviously that just reduces our need to borrow. Now that does have a small flow-on effect with regards to interest paid and those sorts of things, but it's marginal there. The second column there is rural seals, so you'll see all we did was we increased 300,000 onto our capital spend. So if you come across to the far column, you'll see that those two decisions had absolutely no impact at the top with regards to our revenues collected, no impact with regards to our operating expenditure. We're still generating exactly the same cash flows from those available to capital spend. But what it does mean is rather than having to fund 39.5 million, we only now have to fund 37.8, and we already had 34 million of cash coming in, and so now we're only having to borrow 3.8. So as we go through, I'll make the adjustments on your decisions. You will see, though, that if you were to make a decision with regards to, say, adding $100,000 worth of operating expenses in, then obviously that would appear further up. That would then reduce the cash available for funding capital expenditure, which would therefore also have the same effect that if you choose not to put other revenues up to offset it, that it has the flow-on effect of increasing our debt. So.
Thomas, just in relation to any impact.
I have got a column there with regards to we can adjust those rates, and if you do adjust, I assume that's what you're meaning. If we do adjust it, you'll see the impact of that as well. But no, at the moment, no adjustment to that.
Councillor Kent, you're going to ask the question because I think this is covering off the questions and the issues that you were raising yesterday.
Thank you. What you're seeing there is on the assumption that all capital works effectively is 100% borrowed. That is not the case. The reduction there of 1.7 million, because just as equally, if we maintain the same level of borrowings, can just as easily be $1.7 million coming off the rates as it can be 1.7 million coming off the borrowings. We're only looking at, according to the draft annual plan document, an increase of 3.5 million in terms of the borrowing over what was in the long-term plan. So, I mean, it wasn't all 100% funded, and that's the assumption that's being presented there.
So Councillor, I've tried to explain it a little bit different to what you've had, is that ultimately, you're right, well, all our capital expenditure isn't funded by debt, which is correct. However, there is a shortfall. And you do have a choice as to how to fund that shortfall. And in this case, we are choosing to fund it by debt. I guess with regards to focusing on the long term, if you do have a shortfall, I guess it's like anything. Do you choose to reduce your revenue, which then compounds and causes you problems into the future year? Or do you reduce your debt or increase your debt and so forth? And there's two philosophical differences in how to approach this. And I guess the difference maybe between you and I is that if I do have a reduction in capital spend, I would choose to elect to reduce my borrowings versus reducing my income, because I'm not too sure if we were to act like a business, I'm not sure what businesses out there in the world would choose to reduce their revenues, because that has a significant detrimental compounding effect into the future.
Councillor Gould, you had a question? I'll come back to you, Councillor.
With your graph, sorry. With the Sir Howard Morrison Centre, you got a deficit of 2 million in there. Shouldn't it be 3 million? Because it was 3 million for the upgrade and 3 million for the earthquake proof of the building.
Oh, sorry, Council, we only reduced the project by 2 million, so it's just reflecting the change in the funding for this year.
It's just for year one.
Okay. And the other thing is the road seal, you've got 300,000 there, and yet in your document you went out with 595,000, and the difference between 1 million and 595,000 is 405,000, and yet in your documentation yesterday, you indicated 700,000. So is the figure of 300,000 will be correct, or?
So
does
again,
it need to be
councillor,
adjusted?
this reflects the decision that you made yesterday of increasing it by 300,000
From 700, which was put in your report.
from the existing budget that was in there, yes.
Councillor Kent, you had a supplementary question, and then Councillor Kumar.
Yes, thank you. In effect, any shortfall can be funded in one of two ways. One is by borrowing, the other one is by rating. The decision as to whether, if there is a shortfall, we go with rating or we go with borrowing is a policy decision that should be made by councillors, not a decision that should be made by staff.
If I can comment on that, I completely agree. Our job is to advise you as to the impact of the decisions you make. One of the things I'd like Thomas to do, and if this is actually of use to council, is to actually just demonstrate the difference between the two in terms of how a change in revenue impacts on our long-term debt position, because I think this is one of the very issues that we were dealing with in that very first graph, which shows debt increasing quite remarkably over a very short period of time, and that was exactly on the back of issues around, I believe, the council at the time looking to maintain a low increase in increase in rating levels, but not reducing cost at the same time, and that's one of the issues that we've got here. So Thomas, I don't know if you can. Right.
I guess just following on is that the challenge for us is, as we've said since 2013, was about running a balanced budget, as well as also generating surpluses to help pay for our capital expenditure and in the long term retiring debt. I guess if you look at it from a year-to-year basis, if you plan to increase your revenue by a certain point and recognising that you also have borrowings, the goal has always been to reduce our borrowings in the long term. If you choose therefore to reduce, say, your rates revenue by 2 million and leave your borrowings where you are, that has a significant compounding effect in future years and is very difficult to claw back. And as an example of how we did claw that back previously was the 7% rate increase in the year one of the LTP. That was a reflection of previous decisions where rates were kept low for exactly the reason of trying to keep rates low, with the cost base increasing, the capital spend requirements being there, and we borrowed and we borrowed and we borrowed. So, and as a result, we had to have a one-off 7% rate increase to rectify it. So if you therefore choose the underlying cost base is still increasing, and you're choosing to hold your borrowings higher than what you could pull them back from and reduce your rates revenue as a result, this will catch up with this organisation. Now, whether it's next year or the following year, but it will have a significant compounding effect, as we saw back in 2013.
Look, that's the advice from the CFO, but that so really doesn't detract at all from Councillor Kent's proposition that it is actually a governance decision as to how you want to treat these issues. I think what Thomas is saying is that over a 10-year period, a $2 million change effectively will spiral out to, what would that be, 20, 25, $30 million. So effectively your debt is going to come up by $30 million over the 10-year period. Notwithstanding that there is the ability to recast the spreadsheet from what Thomas has presented to you today, if that's what you wish. So we could, for example, look to say, what could we reduce rates by and maintain the 5.5 projected increase in borrowing level that was originally cast in the annual plan. So in other words, that's reducing the rates increase, but maintaining the 5.5 million borrowings level. Now, our strong advice to you is that is not a prudent financial approach. it will result in $25 to $30 million increase in our debt level over a 10-year period. But that is nevertheless your decision.
So Councillor Kumar and then Councillor Hunt.
Thank you, Chairperson. Just wanted to know that staff expense of 25 mil, is that in wages, salaries and contracts?
That's all costs relating to our staff expenditure, as in all staff employed by council.
So just a supplementary question on that. So that's in, with the revenue that we gain, is it in line with where we should be sitting? Or is it higher than?
I'm not sure exactly what you mean with how do we measure where it's expected to be. It is what it is. Well, it's as per expected with regards to the complement of staff that we're carrying, and it is consistent with previous years and taking into account a small increase to reflect increase in salaries.
And it reflects the Chief Executive's comment that Council is running a lean organisation at present. Councillor Hunt.
Just a comment about what Councillor Kent said about our decision making for whether it's capital or operational. And of course, you know, and using the 300,000 we've put in there, we could put that into rates and increase that. But of course, that means that this group of ratepayers are going to pay for the whole lot, which of course is not how we operate, because it's a capital build. The maintaining of the road, once we've built it, will move into operational because it becomes business as usual, which we rate from. So I think for me it's a lot about the intergenerational equity, and I think people forget that when you build a big item, whether it's a road or a swimming pool, you don't expect the ratepayers of today to pay for it. You expect the ratepayers for the next 50 years to pay for it, because the next 50 years they're going to be using it or until it gets replaced. And that's for me one of the fundamental things that people mistake. And if you use the example you used, Mr. Williams, of continuing our borrowing and reducing our rates, then essentially we're going to be borrowing to pay for OPEX. And we know what problems that got us into in the past. We have a PricewaterhouseCoopers report that specifically spells out what happens when you put a freeze on your rate and you continue your borrowing. So we've now reversed that trend. We know where we're going, and if we build something big, then we borrow to build it so that everyone who uses it for the next 5, 10, 15, whatever years helps to pay for it. And then the maintenance of it on a day-to-day use goes to those of us who are using it on a day-to-day use. And for me, that's my understanding of where we're going, and I think I'm looking forward to the rest of it. But that clarifies, and I think the way you've put it out there, Thomas, is really clear, that the capital expenditure, whether we agree or disagree to add or delete, doesn't effectively affect the top half of the graph. So that doesn't change how we're going to, what our revenue is and our current expenditure at this point. Is that a fair? Yeah. Do you want to comment on that intergenerational, or is there anything else to add to that? I mean, am I quite clear? Am I quite correct in what I've been discussing? Yeah.
Yes, you are. I think you're very clear, and you're also correct. The only thing I just wanted to clarify, and Councillor Kent, is I understand what your proposal was, and I don't want to unfairly represent it, was that because the SHMPAC reduction of $2 million had occurred, that doesn't have to be off debt, that it could be a reduction off the rates revenue line. That's right.
Councillor Rotorua.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've actually found this morning's discussion very helpful. And I just wondered, Thomas, if that first one that was put up, I think it was the first with decision-making options, because there was 8 of them there. And I wondered if I could have a print off of that, because today I'm going to look at it and decide which of these am I going to be aware of when I'm making decisions. So I just found that very simple and very, very helpful to me.
Councillor Kent?
Thank you. On a slightly different note, just on that table, I note that if you could just go back to the figures, please. That just disappeared. You've got total capital expenditure at 39,500. The capital expenditure in here was 39,992. I don't want to be pedantic, but I mean, the difference in the figures is more than the 300,000 that we're talking about.
Sorry, Councillor, as I said, I put this together last night with the summary information I had. I couldn't log into the server because of technical issues. It is fairly close to what it is, but I have rounded.
It illustrates the point, yes.
Yeah.
Drawing this discussion to a close, and again this is coming back I think to what Councillor Hunt was asking, we can over the period while you're looking at the deliberations and submissions have Thomas model, if you like, what the implication of this decision is for the longer term debt levels, if that's of use to you. Otherwise obviously we continue on with the assumption being as it is presented today.
Supplementary to that then, can we just clarify, because the debt graph that you've shown there doesn't include all the expenditure for out of the forest? That was clarified before, the last time you showed this graph.
No, look, it reflected the position at the time of the LTP. So I guess, as we've said before, the good thing about the previous 2 years where we didn't borrow to the levels we expected but paid down debt is we created that extra headroom, so we can accommodate things like the likelihood maybe of additional costs of exiting the forest, and with regards to the cost of the upgrade of the wastewater treatment plant upgrade. So we are able to therefore accommodate that, but that would definitely go on top of that, yes.
So just got a last slide to finish off.
So councillors, I hope you'll bear with me on this one, because this is the slide that may result in some frustration. One of the things I want to just emphasise again is the long-term nature of many of the decisions that you make. One of the patterns of the past that wasn't really evident until recent years was the fact that if you simply put in more cost into the organisation without identifying how that cost will be funded, then ultimately what happens is some quite unpredicted outcomes. What we're seeing today, for example, is many of our buildings and our infrastructure is not to the standard that we would like it to be. And effectively what that's happened, I believe, from is reprioritisation of asset maintenance expenditure, which should have actually occurred into other areas. Now, that's meaning at the moment we're doing some major catch-up work, effectively. The latest, for example, being the Sportsdrome. If you would like a brief visit to the Sportsdrome, I'd urge you to just, for example, look at the pergola in the entranceway. Currently it's got holes in it and it's got rust on it that is quite unsightly. Now that is actually being addressed at the moment. The question is, how did it get like that? And my belief is, again, from the fact that reprioritisation of expenditure within a year without appreciating how expenditure will be funded results in unpredictable outcomes where staff start trying to make balancing decisions that sometimes result in an outcome that you don't predict. And in this case, I think it's resulted in some of our assets not being maintained to the level I believe that you would want them to be. The second bullet point there is that whilst you may make a decision today for 100k expenditure, the view over the longer term is significant, because 100,000 today in a 10-year debt window translates to an increased $1 million of debt over 10 years. So you can see that quite small decisions today can have longer term consequences which are much greater. The other thing that I tried to stress yesterday was the risk of the substitution approach. Now, the substitution approach is an age-old followed methodology where you effectively say, if you take something from the left hand, you can put something in the right hand. The problem with that is that all of our projects in this organisation have had a lot of background work done on them. They've had multiple stakeholder engagements. They've been through multiple deliberations within council. They've potentially got dependencies to other actions that fundamentally can have unpredicted consequences when you simply just say, well, we think this is more important than that, so therefore that actually goes. So what I'd ask you is, we don't follow the substitution approach. What we instead do is to focus on the options that we put up earlier, and all of those options are viable. What none of them actually focus on is a simple substitution approach during an annual plan deliberations.
So, councillors, just to wrap that up, and thank you, Jeff, on the 29th of June, when we consider the annual plan, and that'll include the decisions we made yesterday and what we decide today, we'll have that option of agreeing with the proposed rates increase as per the discussion document, and keeping a tight rein on debt levels into the future, or some other approach if someone wants to move that. So that's an option, and that's probably for the 29th of June, is the advice I get from Thomas on that. So if there are no further questions, I'll now ask Una to explain our approach, and JP, to explain our approach in decision making on the rather intimidating looking matrix we've got in front of us.
Good morning, councillors. Councillors, what we've put in front of you, and the chair just talked about it briefly, is we just wanted to make sure that we gave you a feel for some of the explanations we would be giving back to submitters about the points they had raised. Obviously that sometimes it becomes quite a short discussion when you look at a decision, but what's really important is that people have gone to a lot of trouble to make a submission to us, and they deserve a reasoned and clear explanation about where council's at, and even if it is just a case of noting what they've said, that we've actually put some effort into making sure that they get a proper response. Now, councillors, we've quickly put together the comments here in talking to staff, so there may be some typos in here. They do need to be tidied up a bit as part of those responses, but it's really just to give you a feel for the kind of responses we wanted to make back to submitters. So in this example, councillors, you can see on the spreadsheet that we've actually just packaged up a number of points around the pressures on the housing market, impacts on homeless, the pushing of some people into emergency housing like hotels, impacts on rents and availability of what should be a reasoned stock. And so really what we've identified and we would be wanting to respond to these submitters is really along the point of, yes, council does see housing as an area of pressure, and we have a big move project around trying to support a community housing trust being established. And we're also looking specifically at our own pensioner housing stock and lifting the standard of those. And also there we've got the reference to the needing to open up further land for subdivision to enable people to see growth in the available housing stock. Our work with Housing New Zealand, and again we might elaborate still further on that one because Housing New Zealand's made a commitment to building a number of new homes within the district to support social housing. And obviously also reference a workshop that was held very recently with a number of partners around MSD and really looking at trying to progress a housing trust. So there's quite a bit of information there that we kind of want to just pass back to those submitters who clearly have seen quite a significant issue, but if anything, trying to reassure them that there is a plan and there is a number of stakeholders involved in that process. So councillors, on that basis, and you can see there that that's the kind of approach we're taking, making sure we give a reasonably comprehensive explanation, and then for us, we have this situation there of saying, look, the recommendation from those points is it's a note, and obviously it is one of our big move projects around the formation of a housing trust and the spatial plan development. So that's where we're up to, and so that's kind of the recommendation space of how we wanted to step through this process, councillors.
Thank you, JP. And Una, with each of these groupings, so taking affordable housing, submissions 622 through to 799, you're asking us for a mover and a seconder to note and support the approach that will be taken in the response. Is that correct? Yeah. Any questions of JP and Una on this one? Councillor Kent and Councillor Rokawate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just trying to find where some of the submissions actually are on here. Because when I went through all the submissions, there were many, and I lost count of them, that were actually submitting against our rate increase. I don't see that on this list anywhere at all. And I'll quote one very specific, very good letter, submission number 671, which does not appear on here, from a Mr. Edmonds, which would very succinctly put the case for not increasing rates. I would like to know why these things aren't being considered.
Councillor, I'll go back during a break and check what's happened to that one. It may be just a case of in our filtering and that it may have just dropped off the list. So I'll go back in a break and check that one out for you. Was that 671?
671 was one that's 100% on that topic, but the topic was raised in numerous submissions right the way through.
These pages are not numbered, but there's an unnamed, an unnumbered submission which says, how about curb a little spending and think about the impact on the ratepayer? Set budgets as if it was your own money instead of spending it. So I found that on one page, so I guess that's along the lines. There's a whole bunch of them on that second to last page. But Una can come back to us on that one. Councillor Rudd.
Councillors, just one other addition. I think rather than pulling it out as a separate topic, Una's just sort of noted there is a number of rates referenced ones under the Rotorua Lakes Council topic. So we should have just called it rates or broken that topic down a bit further. So there's probably the basis. That point is where if we find this submission, it should be included in that space.
Thank you, JP. Councillor Rokawate.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm just looking at the affordable housing one and the comments there. And I just wondered if somewhere in your comments back to the submitters, you could say that council is concerned to see affordable and social housing, because there's a clear difference. And if we don't address the affordable housing, at some stage they drop down into social housing. But so I just wondered so that the submitters know that we're looking at obviously wanting to support both.
Yep.
Can I
Jeff
just go back to, sorry, Councillor Rokawate, I just want to go back to a comment that Councillor Kent made. I think it's important for transparency's sake that all submissions are to the councillors. So all submissions have been made available to all of our councillors. And obviously the challenge that brings is the ability to read through what has been extremely high volume of material. But nevertheless, it's important, though, that all submissions have gone to all of our councillors. The second point that I'd make is that the work that staff have done is not to try and actually summarise every point of every submission, but merely to try and to give you a framework within which you can make decisions in. I don't think it's surprising that, given the complexity, no doubt you've read them, the complexity of all of our submissions, this is going to be a fraught task for staff to be able to encompass absolutely every aspect of every submission into a framework. So what we're doing is trying to provide support to you in your decision making, but of course there is the element where at the end of the day the reliance is also that the submissions are to you, and that issues that you feel are important in those submissions that need to be brought out are your responsibility to bring out.
Thank you, Jeff. So I'd like to start progressing through this, and I support the comment of Councillor Rotorua Tate, including the word social in there. The third of those, submission 653, speaks to that as well. Councillor Gould, did you want to make any comment on this?
I'd like to make a comment with the piece of paper we've just been given about 5 minutes ago. With number 7, can it just read request staff to bring back options? Take out the words for removing costs, because then they'll come back with the options, what the pluses and minuses are.
Through Mr. Chair, that's implicit. We've got it as a project, so the housing, and there has been a request previously around us to making sure we're quite clear about our housing direction. So it is a project that is underway. So noting was the intention of saying there's a large amount of work underway, including discussion of a housing trust, including looking at our pensioner housing. So Councillor, just to give you the comfort that noted means that that project is proceeding and will be back before council regularly.
So can I have Councillor Maxwell?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say to JP and to Una, I think this is good, that the way you have put it in a way where getting all the submissions and putting them into theming groups, and that, it helps for decision making. To try and grab one or two individual ones and use that as a basis for making a decision. The one where it says no rate increase, well, many of us yesterday would never have voted for one where we wanted extra going on to the roading seals or anything like that. So no, I just want to say from the beginning that I appreciate it being put into a theming setting. Thank you.
Thank you. So can I call for a mover and a seconder that we note and approve the response to submitters on the issue of housing? Moved Councillor Gould, seconded Councillor Maxwell. Is there any further discussion? I'll put that. All in favour? Against? Carried. Move on now to the airport. This one's reasonably self-explanatory. JP?
Yes, through Mr. Chair, just pointing out again to the submitter, the upgrade is part of the airport's business plan, which was included in the statement of intent presented to council and approved by council, and that this project is currently underway. So that's why we sort of we're taking the view that the recommendation here was noting the submitter's views, but just to give that explanation about this project has started.
I just wonder, JP, do we send an electronic and a paper copy to people? Because in a case like this, is it possible to send a reference so that person can actually look at the airport's business plan? Because often our community write in, they want to know about something and all they get is that it's in someone else's plan but nowhere to find that plan. So either a paper copy or a email link or something to flesh it out, and that goes for anything else that we send back responding to something that's public knowledge.
So I've got it moved by Councillor Rotorua Tate and seconded by Councillor Hunt. Is there any further discussion on the airport one? I'll put that. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Aquatic Centre, JP?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I suppose just closing off, most of the submissions we received were electronic, so we do have an email address, so that makes that quite a bit easier for us to create those links. So we'll certainly do that for electronic and paper. Councillors, we just got back this response from the Aquatic Centre, and the fact that there is a significant discount applied to 55 plus, and additional discounts coming in for those with gold cards. So I think when those were first established, this council did consider policy adjustments, and you can see there that the Aquatic Centre management have just come back with a response saying, actually we do more than what is normal across the sector, and so I suppose we probably have some difficulty as to suggesting why a particular age group do you get an award at 70 as opposed to just being over the normal thresholds of 65 plus, and obviously the counter view would be what about children in the same vein. So this one was a view that this was a noting that there is benefits in that space, and only take that response.
I'll move that response. Is there a seconder? Councillor Rokawa Tate, thank you. Any further discussion? Councillor Gould.
When you talk about concession passes for the gold card holders, are there concession passes for the 55 plus, or is it just single discount when people walk in one at a time?
My understanding is they get the benefit of you can get a normal discount card, but I think it's just a one-off charge. I can check on that one, just make sure that is the case, Councillor. But Rob, unfortunately, has just left, so I can't get further explanation on that.
Councillor Kent, you had a question on?
Can I just put in a request, please, that when we do these spreadsheets in further, you actually show the page numbers. I'm having great difficulty trying to move to a submission because half the submission numbers don't actually show on Stella, and therefore it's very difficult to actually suddenly refer back to one. Thank you.
Okay, so the Aquatic Centre moved and seconded. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. We'll move on now to one in the Lakes Community Board area of boat ramps. So the request for upgrade of boat ramp at Acacia Bay, and we note that it is already planned for the coming financial year.
I'll move.
Moved Councillor Gould, seconded Councillor Tapsell. Is there any discussion on the response? Councillor Gould.
Question.
Yes.
Councillors, I'm just responding to that question. It is budgeted for 2 boat ramps to be undertaken this coming financial year, so the plan is to undertake it. Rob Pickethley in the Parks team, there's the 2 that are being proposed is obviously the Acacia Bay one at Karaka, but also a second one at Gisborne Point as well. So both of them have been discussed with the community board, and some planning is underway with those communities to see those undertaken this year. So that's where we're up to on this.
Thank you, JP. So it's been moved, Councillor Gould, seconded Councillor Tapsell. All in favour? Against? Carried. Building services. JP, is there any comment on this?
Councillors, we just, obviously this was a comment about the quality of service and the experience that people obviously have received, potentially feeding into their view that if we're keen on seeing better development for the city, we need to have a good customer-centric perspective. So our comment there is that customer service is important to us as an organisation, and this would be referred through to that department for consideration and making sure they have that kind of experience.
Moved Councillor Rokawa Tate, seconded Councillor Hunt. Yeah, I got a bit of an issue with this. I mean, I don't see, as long as our building service is responding efficiently and in a timely manner, they have no other impact on getting more houses built. That's up to investment. But Katie Pye, any other comment on that one? Councillor Gould?
The Would that mean also that the staff might increase during the year if more business was around the building? Consents?
I could let the Chief Executive comment. I think we're also already doing building inspections for Eastern Bay of Plenty, Kawerau and Edgecombe as well. So they're working to a fairly high level already. But that is a possibility if there's the demand. So, sorry, Carol, did we have a mover and seconder for that? Yep. So it's been moved and seconded. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Capital spend and debt. Request for clarification. I think we've had quite a bit on that already this morning. JP?
Nothing to add to that one, Mr Chair, just other than saying that obviously we do need to annotate it in the final documentation, and so that information will be available.
So can someone, do I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Kent, Councillor Rotorua Tate. I'll put that, all in favour? Against? Carried. And now, thank you, on to compliance services, JP.
So, councillors, there's a couple here that have started to pick up on bylaws at different points. So we've regard to a specific there around what's been proposed in the equality bylaw. So we've noted it here, but we're actually intending and referring it across to that submission process as well. So we will advise the submitter that their submission is being carried across as a submission to the bylaw.
Yeah, pretty good response there. In respect to the one on dogs, are we going to give the submitter some indication of timing when this assessing these issues will be?
Through Mr Chair, we haven't actually got a time frame from the staff involved, so we can actually go back to Nevin and just, I think that's an important change we should be making there, is just give some time to that perspective, because otherwise it is extremely open-ended.
Councillor Tapsell, a question on this one?
Yes, and I was also going to ask about the time, but also, and we've got refer to budget manager, but would that actually come under the Parks and the Sports and Recreation portfolio, or an actual portfolio that relates to that? I just don't want it to get shifted to the side just because of budget reasons.
Through Mr Chair, I think what we have to do there is just actually make sure there's a few portfolios that would probably have a perspective on that, but it probably is a sport and recreation one, but because it will relate to the policy, we'll just talk to Nevin about where that goes, but make sure we've got those links into those policies. So I don't have a specific answer, but I think everyone needs to be involved in that one.
Yeah, I think the city development portfolio, particularly when the submitter, the third submitter there, is talking about dogs in the city, if they're meaning the inner city, it's one we've tackled before. Councillor Gould, you had a question?
Question about the same issue. Does that mean we're going to change the policy or go out to public consultation?
What we're doing here is we're referring it to the business manager, who will then talk into those different portfolio groups, at which point a view would be formed. Now, that's a long way short of then a decision back to council or a committee to recommend whether you want to consult with the wider public. So there's a couple of steps in that process, councillor, before we would go out for public consultation.
Thank you. So bearing in mind the comments around giving the submitters some indication of timing, because we'll get these same submissions at the LTP, I'm sure. So do I have a mover for the response on compliance services? Councillor Gould, seconded Councillor Bentley. I'll put that. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Now we have some bouquets or compliments. So, JP, Do we
think
have to vote on accepting our...
Yeah, I think it's just for consistency, if you don't mind taking those as a group, and maybe this, Carol, if there's a decision just to move the theme in one go, you could probably just include it in the first line only. So maybe it's a case of just in the line across the compliments, just move and second that one.
Look, I'm happy to move that one, and I was speaking with a staff member in a public setting on the weekend, just off-duty staff member, who just said it was delightful, some of the submissions that came in. It really gives our staff a lift when they see that their work is appreciated. So I'm happy to that we acknowledge people who have given compliments to the organisation. Is there a seconder for that one? Councillor Bentley, thank you. I'll put that. All in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Consenting process. JP.
Through Mr. Chair, just this one here just refers to decisions of the District Licensing Committee, so we've just made sure that we've got that explanation there, that obviously they're referring in this case in their submission to not liking the fact that a bottle store is going on Margarita Street, but this decision has actually been taken by that committee and based on that application, so we're just passing on that information to them, so it is just a noting.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Is there a mover for that response? Councillor Rotorua Tate and seconded Councillor Gould, thank you. I'll put that. All in favour? Against? Carried. Economic development. JP.
So, Councillor, there was some quite, I suppose, broad themes in this area, but we've just tried to pick up in the comments there that obviously the importance of the tourism sector or industry to our local economy, and also making the reference back for people who aren't aware of it. You know, there's this view now with decisions out of Auckland about bed taxes, which aren't really a bed tax at all. They're just a economic development targeted rate. Focused on hotels or accommodation, that we do actually have our marketing spending that is actually funded in a majority sense from that business and economic development targeted rate. So that's the reference there, and I suppose the funding policy and future targeted rates is something that really needs to be referred through to your consideration for the next long-term plan. So that's what we've noted there in the actual recommendation.
Are there any questions on this one? I guess, JP, the response could also mention that part of the LTP is a rating review. Is there Councillor Gould?
Questions, Cellnet coverage questions are actually central government's issue, it's not local government's issue. So we've got no control over it. So it's the central government have got a plan underway for the Bay of Plenty region to increase coverage for the rural area with cell phone coverage.
Yeah, if I could speak to that question, Council has taken a role in this, so Council has, through the Digital Strategy Group and the Economic Growth Portfolio, worked with communities, the rural community, in identifying the rural black spots and submitted an application to the RBI2 funding and the mobile black spot funding initiatives. And as the response stated, we haven't yet had a decision on those. So we have advocated strongly on behalf of our community. So, any other clarification or questions on the economic development response? I'll happy to move that one. Have I got a seconder for that? Councillor Hunt, thank you. I'll put that. All in favour? Against? Carried. General comments.
Councillors, this one referred to fees and charges and the amount that should be more of a user pays focus. So what we've tried to do here is just again highlight that becomes sort of a funding policy decision for you to consider, and obviously the the flow through for that is the rating review at the end of it. But fees and charges becomes part of the LTP review process, mainly centred on the funding policy. So that's the explanation we've tried to provide there. Not gone into any specifics about particular service areas, but just taken it as a collective of, there's a number of philosophical reasons that council makes decisions, whether it's an individual service or public versus private benefits. So that's part of that long-term plan consideration. So that's the reference we'll be making there.
Anyone want any clarification on that? So you're moving it, Councillor Rokawate, thank you, and seconded Councillor Tapsell. I'll put that all in favour. Against, carried, thank you. Governance and partnerships, JP, this is for you.
Yes, councillors, I suppose this where we get bouquets, we also get brickbats. So this the kind of perspective here that in trying to get information and engagement out about what council's undertaking, that we're doing too much. So we've just tried to highlight there. We're continuing to look at methods to improve our consultation and engagement with our community. And obviously that involves public meetings, but it also involves trying to get things through the newspaper or into people's letterboxes, and increasing the use of technology as well. So taking that comment back, and obviously that's something we'll pass through to Una and Ingrid for their consideration about our methods.
Councillor Kent, followed by Councillor Rokawate.
Thank you. Can I just ask what the advertising for the annual plan, the spatial plan and the 2030 refresh has actually cost this council in recent months?
Have to come back with an answer, councillor. I think we advised you previously in one of the hearings how much it cost us to do the mail out, the letterbox, which was I think under $5,000 delivered to the 27,000 households. That's far more cost effective than paying for advertising within the newspaper, but we can certainly look at providing you with a breakdown of the costs of those areas. But as I say, it's our attempts to make sure we get that messaging out.
Councillor Rokawate, and then Councillor Hunt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wondered, Mr. Chair, perhaps in the communication to the submitters, that there's something we could say along the lines that we are a diverse community, and therefore our engagement and communication methods will vary. And that's reflected in how we have been consulting of recent.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. Councillor Hunt.
I think if we're going to do a price analysis, in the past when we printed everything off, and we also had all those printed agendas for everybody over everything, that was a huge cost to us. And I know when we did a lean thinking process through our printing of what was necessary, even down to what page colours we printed stuff on, I think that those costs need to be borne in mind when we're looking at this, because advertising electronically and a direct mail drop is far more cost effective. So I think what I'm hearing from some of these submitters is that they're used to it being done in an old-fashioned way, and they're not really up with the current play of what's working, and we're trying new ways to reach new demographic. And at the moment, because not everyone is connected electronically, we have to do the whole spectrum of everything. We have to do a scattergun approach and throw it in every corner, lest we leave some corners out, because we know we've got a community of the highly internet literate to the completely internet illiterate, and so we use every format, and if we didn't do it, we'd be criticised for not doing that. So I think that's important to bear in mind.
Thank you. Councillor Gould, a question or a comment?
Chair, the mail drop was actually the most successful part of all, because the Daily Post advertising, not a lot of people in Rotorua get the paper or read the paper. I know sometimes it is available electronically, but then again, some people only pick up the used part, not the adverts part. So I still think next time we should concentrate a little bit more on a mail drop to be more successful with your promotions. Community groups, not a lot of people go to the community centres to hear the councillors or the staff members talk about particular subjects, yet the committee members are very conversant in the subject, and they do put in a very good form.
Thank you. Look, this is one of these ones where you're damned if you do and damned if you don't in terms of consultation, and I acknowledge the fact that JP was out till 10 o'clock last night engaging in consultation along with the Lakes and Rural Community Boards who've also put a big effort into all the consultation we're undergoing at present. So I think, I acknowledge that. Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to suggest that as part of the response, we actually say that the council is going to look at the how effective the advertising has been, and that based on that, plan its future campaigns and its future approach. And I think that would be go a long way to help satisfy some of the people who are rather concerned at the volume of it.
Yeah, I'd concur that. I think we're continually assessing A, the need to consult, and B, the most effective method. So thank you for that. Can I have a mover for those responses? Councillor Tapsell, seconded Councillor Rotorua Tate. I'll put that. All in favour? Against? Carried. Inner City Revitalisation Strategy. JP.
Really to add to this one, Councillor, other than the explanation that obviously the decision has been made, the sales were removed and the project is in the construction phase.
Councillor Gould.
Reply to the submitter, would you like to suggest that the project should be finished by early August?
Yep, that's helpful. Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I actually ask what's happened to the sales? I mean, have we found a home for them or what?
Councillor, just speaking off the last information I had, no, they haven't found a new home. So they were taken down and set aside with the hope that someone might be interested in taking them. The problem with them, of course, is they're huge. And as we discovered when we tried to take out the poles that held them up, that there was an incredible amount of engineering in place to keep that size and weight of sails up. So we've offered it for people to take them if they wanted to cut them down and repurpose them, but in most cases it's easier for people just to buy new ones. So we haven't managed to find a home. So I think if they haven't been picked up soon, there's something that will not be reused.
Thank you, JP. I'll move that response. Is there a seconder? Councillor Rotorua Tate, thank you. All in favour? Against? Carried. Lake level. Out of our control.
Just that's a reference across to the regional council. We started writing a fuller explanation about the gates had been open during the recent event all the time, but still the lake level continued to rise above what could be let out, and we just cut it back to saying, look, we'll refer that across as a submission to the regional council.
I think we could add in there that we have requested the regional council during those wet weather events. We could clearly see the impact on some of our infrastructure and lakeside erosion, and so we were active in advocating regional council to get those levels down. And I know rafting businesses have been out of work for about 8 weeks now as a result of the gates having to be opened. Councillor Gould, do you want to add to that?
Happy to move it, but also we should send a letter to the regional council for the what's going to happen in the future with the lake level, whether it's going to be opened at a certain level, because we can't afford for the lake to keep rising all the time, and with all the corrosion around the lake edges, particularly a lot of the properties, including the council's lakefront property, being damaged.
Yep, thank you. So, noted. Seconded, Councillor Rotorua Tate. I'll put that. All in favour? Against? Carried. Library.
Councillors, this one just referred to decisions around the mobile service. So we had signalled previously, the library manager has signalled, I think through her O&M reports, that the bus was nearing the end of its life and that we would move to a more cost-effective approach of using smaller vans, which would make it more flexible and still reach the same areas and locations, particularly care homes and schools. And also that they had acquired that technology van as well. So really a change in the bus service to a van service, which doesn't quite sound as good, but does the same thing.
So in effect, the service is not lost, it's a different level of service, different mode. Mover, Councillor Bentley, seconded Councillor Hunt, you wanted to comment?
Just that actually they have diversified, the diversification, and again, one big old bus. We've now been got for a very good price the Noel Leeming one, which had toured the country, and how important that e-learning is, and particularly the visits out to Marae. So it's bringing information to places that otherwise were completely left out, and a bus full of books simply didn't meet the needs of 21st century learning for all age groups. So, you know, kind of flesh out that response, because then there's a really good reason about why we still have two and that diversification. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So, at the bottom of the page, we have the Library and Child Health Hub response.
Yeah, councillors, this is following on from a number of letters and meetings that have been held with CAB since the removal of Community House. So they moved on to Irawera Street, so they were quite keen on still being involved in discussing with council about a return into a council building. They were very interested in the library because of the volume of foot traffic. We looked at their space requirements and talked with them, and had previously advised them that it just wasn't possible to shoehorn them into the facility, though we had made a number of areas available for community services to operate out of hot desk areas, so that offer has remained in place. So that's the basis of the response, councillors.
And is that a free service, the hot desk?
Absolutely.
Councillor Tapsell, you're moving. Thank you. Seconder, Councillor Rokawa Tate. Does anyone want to discuss further? Councillor Rokawa Tate.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The hot desks that's made available, is that perhaps used from various organisations when they have an awareness week, you know, breast cancer awareness week or something? Is that the sort of thing too?
Yeah, that's the intention in that area, and the way we're intending on doing it, rather than sort of seeing people disappear off into meeting rooms, it was trying to be highly visible within the main entrance area of the library. You know, the opportunity to have a flag up and Justice of the Peace days, and just regular scheduling in advice that people could access through the library. Again, it's part of that wrapping more services around what's being provided within the Children's Health Hub and the library as a centre of information for our community.
Thank you. We're going well. Maybe at 11 o'clock pause for a short tea break, but we'll carry on with neighbourhood revitalisation, sustainability portfolio. I've omitted to put the Library Child Health Hub to the vote. So we do have a mover and a seconder. I'll put that. All in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Revitalisation, JP.
Councillors, just probably a slightly longer explanation for this one. Obviously, Fordlands is prioritised at the moment, so that's the Western Heights work is underway. Previously it had been Ngāpuna, which has still got some areas to just finish off in some of their action plan. We had the revitalisation policy that we would probably like to review as part of the LTP process, and really it might be useful at that stage to actually sort of start identifying what are the three communities over the 3 years of the LTP, just so we've got some clarity for those who can expect the support or the work being undertaken within those communities. So at this stage it's a case of just saying we're noting that the Fordlands reference there, and I know it is noted, but it's certainly something that we're actually looking to make sure we bring into the discussion around the LTP as well.
Councillor Rokawa Tate.
Mr. Chair, with Fordlands, and I think you're saying that, and I just want to, I'd like to think that because they do have a very active Fordlands community group, and I think in any response that should be included, because there's been some great work that's gone on to revitalise and you know, get some cohesion in that community, and it's from the efforts of the Fordlands community group themselves. So, thank you.
Yeah, Councillor, I think that's a really important point. It was one of the criteria of the policy we set that actually the community themselves had to be ready to do the work themselves. And Fordlands has definitely been in that space, and that's the reason why they're being worked with in this context. So I think more detail, as you've requested, is worthwhile on that.
Councillor Gould, you had a question on this one?
Thank you very much. Would this be a 2-year project, and is part of this project going to start in 2017-18, or is it going to go in 2018-19?
It's yes, that's correct. It's one that's difficult to have a calendar, our financial year start finish. So what we're finding certainly with Ngāpuna and some of the work in Western Heights is it has a long start and quite a long tail process as well for delivery. So yes, it's more than a single year.
JP, did this submitter touch on the issue of derelict homes? Because I know it's been a bit of a bugbear with Fordlands in the past, and we've done some work in that space.
Yeah, I can't remember off the top of my head, Councillor. So we can check, and if there is any reference, we can probably make some more comments about that as well.
Thank you. So can I have a mover for noting the response? Thank you, Councillor Gould. Seconded, Councillor Hunt. I'll put that. All in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Public toilets, one submission there.
Councillors, as you're aware, we do have a program of renewals in that area, and one of the challenges is just how many can be done in a particular year. Boys Beach is actually asking for a particular upgrade, so we're looking at just referring that into the long-term plan, hence the reference there, because it would be a specific upgrade to what is probably one of the better toilets on reserves. But it is a heavily used area, so we just need some work through the business unit manager and into the LTP process. The alternative is that we would be referring this across for consideration to the Lakes Community Board, because obviously they have some funding intended for this coming financial year as well. So that's the two outcomes from this one.
Councillor Gould.
Mr. Chairman, with Boys Beach as being used quite a bit by the tourists, I would particularly like it to be done sooner rather than being put in the 2018 to 2028 long-term plan, because it is the tourists which use it the most, and the locals get upset because it's not up to a high enough standard.
When did we have that loo review, JP? That wasn't that long ago.
Yeah, so my executive colleagues mocked me when I talked about the Great Loo Review. So we do, I can't remember actually how long ago it was, Councillor. It does seem a while ago now, actually, 5 years. And I actually think we do need to look very hard at the number, distribution and some of the gradings across some of those toilet facilities to get a more effective investment. So I think it is time that it does need to go into LTP, and I think it needs more than just a spot solution on particular toilets as being requested here.
Yeah, look, I'd agree with that, and we have been implementing that loo review, on a case-by-case basis with the lakefront and Tikitapu, etc. Councillor Sturt, you want to comment?
I think this is a specific need, but I just wanted to ask with the process, sorry, apologies for lateness. You did say, JP, that the business unit would look at it and the Lakes Community Board as well. However, for something to go into the long-term plan, it would have to be scoped up through the committees to see if it is a priority through your loo review. It isn't the first time that Boys Beach has come to our attention, particularly with secondary schools and the different clubs that are using it out there for sport and recreational activities, and that's where I'm coming from. So I do see that, but I would like to see the priority list, and Una's been shaking her head. I think Una, it was about 3 years ago we did the loo review. Yeah, I think it might be a bit longer, so maybe that needs an update, and maybe that could come back through the committee structure and we could look at that. So I'd move along those lines, Mr. Chair, if that's appropriate.
Thank you. So, moved Councillor Sturt, seconded Councillor Gould, that we refer to the LTP process. All in favour? Against? So this might be an opportune time before we tackle a raft of submissions on roads and footpaths to take a short break, and we'll reconvene at 5 past. Thank you, councillors. If we can recommence. We're now up to the group of submissions clustered under the heading of roads and footpaths. Welcome, Stavros.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councillors, there are 26 submissions in total relating to roads and footpaths. I note, in summary, 4 of them relate to current and anticipated NZTA work, and we can talk about, if you wish. We've got 1 submission relating to the bus services, which is, as a regional council responsibility, but we'll refer to them. 2 of the submissions relate to rural seal extensions, which we canvassed yesterday, and we've got 2 submissions with regards to the business plan for the Redwoods Forest and the Long Mile and related types of works. The other 17 submissions all relate to what I call asset management planning priorities. They are based on our intervention multi-criteria. And most of the references we make in response is that the submissions have been noted and they will be referred to the asset management maintenance programs ahead of us to be responded to. But happy to take any individual questions you may have.
Councillor Sturt.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I need to ask a question with regard to process in view of the $1 million that was supported yesterday and increased for rural seal extension. Can I have an assurance that the policy for categorising the priorities for rural seal extension will be looked at, and as in the past at the LTP based on that criteria, so there was no political influence? Staff used to come to us with a 3-year program saying Amore Road, Keith Road, Smith Road in the 2nd year, Bentley Road, Gould Road, Hunt Road in the 3rd year, Kent Road, Maxwell Road, Sturt Road in the 3rd year. So that when the next LTP came in, once the 1st year was clicked off on that criteria, we would review it every 3 years, and I just wondered whether we could go back to that. Similarly, Mr. Chairman, there's no mention in our budgets, and I know there's one coming up with Murray Road Lines. We used to have a figure in the budget of $50,000 or whatever it was, and when these Murray Road Lines came up, where the Murray Road Line was vested in council through the Murray Land Court, we could put curbing and channeling, drainage, those sorts of things. When the accumulation occurred, then council would do that work, and I know there's a couple that are really bad, and we are getting European title rates off those particular roads, and I'm working with Monty at the moment on one in particular, but I just wondered if you could answer that, Stavros, in terms of the priority with the seal extension, because I don't then want, Mr. Chairman, I'm sure you'll agree, you've been around, Deputy Chair of Works, etc., of the community board or any political input into pushing priorities ahead of each other, because I think it's got to be a fair shake for everybody. Otherwise it will revert back to before I came here. Everything went in Rotorua, nothing went everywhere else.
Yeah, so, fair question. We have reviewed the policy and reaffirmed the policy, and so we then hand the policy to staff to implement. So I'll pass it to Stavros to advise as to whether there's any change to that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councillor Sturt, yes, we're absolutely in agreement with that. The range of criteria used in that policy framework still the same. What we are thinking to add to those criteria is a traffic level, volume of traffic. However, there are 2 or 3 things we can do. One, we continue to work with the Rural Community Board, which is functional at the moment, and we provide this sort of the result of the multi-criteria hierarchy. You would notice if back into our O&M reports, we regularly report about the progress and the schedule and priority for these roads. But, if this council wishes, as part of the LTP to provide a 3-year forward plan on the basis of the hierarchy, more than happy to do so, and I think we're prudent to do so.
Ewan, thank you for that. That's excellent. Now,
Stavros, I have a supplementary question on that one, is that, we've made reference in the discussion and to a potential for a targeted rate to bump a road up the hierarchy. Will that require a review of the policy in the LTP? How's that going to work? Because there'll still be an element of council funding going into a road if it moved up the hierarchy by the agreement to a targeted rate.
Again, that's within the scope of of this council's wisdom. But in simple terms, if, for example, we have $1 million for rural steel extensions this year, and during the LTP, this council wishes to accelerate that program and make it $2 million through the addition of $1 million of targeted rate funding. I don't anticipate the multi-criteria hierarchy will change. All it means is that the rate of progress will double to what currently might be. So I think the criteria will remain the same, and and the list and the execution of the works will happen at a faster rate if that's what you so wish. Now, with regards to targeted levy, it's a matter of funding and policy review, and obviously you need to consider it as part of the LTP, and you will consider the options for that.
can I just follow that up? Stavros, just refresh my memory. The current criteria, well, when I was on Works, and I think you were Deputy Chair, Mr. Chair, it included whether the school bus went down the road, how many dwellings were down the road, the traffic movements down the road, whether there was a curbing, whether there was a land drainage issue and flooding, and all those sorts of things are in the criteria, aren't they? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Gould, good question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With the footpaths, I think the council needs to do a list on what streets have got what footpaths on what sides, because there's a huge number of streets which haven't got footpaths on both sides of the street going back a large number of years. And I'm talking more about the Glenholme area, where a lot of people over 60 reside in. In the spatial plan, which has gone out to public consultation, it shows that 1 in 13 people at the present time are over 65, and by 2050 it'll be 1 in 4 people will be over the age of 65. And I feel we need to look at the footpath program a lot better than has been looked in the past, and improve the quality of the footpath so people can exercise and keep fit.
Yeah, and look, that point was made by the submitter in the wheelchair, who's now on Councillor Bentley's Access Committee. But Stavros, did you want to respond to that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the current council policy is footpath on one side, the level of services footpath on one side, of the road, as a target, requirement. However, I do recognize and agree that some areas, because of the density of of habitation and type of demographics in the area, probably need additional footpaths. We have about 600 kilometers of footpaths. We are undertaking at the moment systematic conditioning assessment of those footpaths to identify footpaths which are ready for reconditioning. However, if this council wishes to review the policy, the level of service policy, the LTP time probably is the right time to consider it.
Some of the trees we've been put on the grass verges around the Rotorua area have affected the concrete footpaths, have broken them and lifted them up, which make them very difficult for people in wheelies or walking sticks to walk around. So I think that should be looked at, should be addressed pretty, within the next 12 months. Otherwise, we're going to have lots of people have accidents and be a lot of complaints through ACC.
So I think Stavros has spoken to that in terms of asset management plans, and I've seen it happen in my street where the grinders come along and ground the lip off at the expansion joints and footpaths. So thank you for that. I have Councillor Bentley moving the noting and actions on all those submissions, grouped right through to the next page on roads and footpaths. Is there a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Sturt. And did you have a question as well?
Or the director of whatever. What happens then? It's referred to them, does it come back through the committee structure, or do staff just talk about it? Or?
I'll let Stavros answer that.
Councillor Sturt, we covered this off this morning. So in a PowerPoint presentation that the Chief Executive gave to councillors this morning, there were a list of options, and those where it might be referred back to a budget manager is in order to give the budget manager and team the opportunity to review and look at, and then in due course that would come back through either a committee or through into an LTP process with all the information for you then to consider and make your decision on.
Have you, Councillor Sturt, got those options for decision making? Yeah. Thank you. So that's been moved and seconded. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Rotorua 2030 goals. Who's going to speak to this one?
Right, councillors, I'm back. I'm sorry, I now have to follow Stavros's 17 at once approach to getting through submission points. Councillors, just you can see our explanations there. Obviously, there's a number of references under that one to focusing on core services. So really what we're highlighting there is obviously we've done the review of 2030, and a couple of things I think we do need to add into that discussion in response to those ones is also core services is not only roads and network infrastructure, it also includes libraries, parks and reserves, halls, and any other public and community facilities that a community deems as being essential through its long-term planning process. So we'll just highlight that. The next part is also just giving a feel for our expenditure around core infrastructure. Thomas has presented in the past this much goes on asset renewal, so looking after what we currently have, and this is what's invested in what we consider to be core infrastructure, as opposed to the small amount that's additional to that. So we'll just highlight those in the explanation as well.
Thank you, JP. Any further comments or questions? Councillor Sturt.
Submission 625, they're requesting that reduction of non-core services, sale of surplus assets, long-term program of debt reduction. I thought we were already doing it. We're on that path, and we've signalled that
so
in this LTP, and so we hopefully will signal it in the next LTP. That with sale of assets, we're going to be addressed towards debt and negating the need to borrow. So rather than note it, I think we should be a bit more proactive. And the second one, I don't think it is the business of council to be providing homes for the homeless in the early education centres for children. That's the private sector. That's the providers of community housing that the government is working through. Yes, we can advocate on that we should have these, but us providing them, I think, is way outside the gambit under the Local Government Act and our spending priorities. I mean, if we get into that, God, we'll be into all sorts of spending arrangements.
So where it says noted, we've noted the submission, but the comments column that precedes that reflects the response that'll be given to the submitter. We've noted the submission, and JP's elaborated on those comments.
No, I'm not happy with that. I think we should be more specific. We are not in the business of providing homes for the homeless and the early education centres for Rotorua for children. However, we are happy to advocate on the community's behalf for the provision of these services. I mean, we need to make these things quite clear. Otherwise, we'll get a gambit of requests next year for the LTP to be in that space, and I don't think we should be.
Councillor's absolutely right. Actually, we've lost off half our comment out of that one, which said specifically that we're not involved in children's centres at all. They're all private. Only things that we provide is planning rules about how they're to be managed and undertaken. And we would be referring back to the previous answer we'd given about homelessness and social and affordable housing. So there is a previous statement on that. So, Councillor, you're absolutely correct, and apologies it's not there in that box.
And that includes our pensioner housing and the future of that. Yeah, thank you. So Councillor Bentley has moved that one. Seconded, Councillor Hunt. I'll put that to the vote. All in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Now, another big list, JP, on Rotorua Lakes Council.
Yes, Mr. Chair, just the first one there is probably one that we should have picked up earlier about comments about the style of the documentation and the consultation process, so that one's just separate, but you can see the rest there starting to pick up on, there's some more generic comments about wide range of comments there, so it's a bit more generic in the responses, and it picks up a number of ones down through that page. So it's probably the next 620 down to 631 is a block of responses, councillors. And we're starting to see there the issues around reducing debt coming through. The councillors' comments previously that we have a financial strategy that looks to hold and improve the sustainability of the organisation financially is also covered in off in some of those things.
Moved Councillor Bentley, seconded Councillor Sturt. Or any further comments or discussion?
If I may, on submission 69, and it's really good we don't know who they are, because I think that's really important that we look at these in an unbiased way, but the comments in the commentary are rather than the action recommendations being noted, are we going to feed that back to the particular submitter? Exactly what we put there? Because I think that sort of sums up exactly the LTP and this annual plan review that we've done sums up what we are in business to do.
Yeah, sorry, Councillor, you missed the explanation we just gave at the start, where the comments column is for us a bit more detail, which would form the basis of our written response to the submitter. So a proper explanation about the points that they've raised, as opposed to saying we received your submission and it's been noted. It's actually an explanation as to what was behind it, and hence my reference to the fact that we've got a number of projects underway around housing. So we provide a fuller explanation than just your submission was received.
Well, and there's a further one, 633, review the outsourcing of engineering processes within council on the options for decision. No, we don't support that. I don't support that, because we're already doing it. What we're doing with our engineering people in-house is policy and strategy, but APR and all the other people, it's outsourced to them to deliver that. So I mean, we're just going to say, council does look at the method for providing its service. This is part of a longer term. It doesn't say. It's not our position currently. I mean,
Well, I think that is our position currently, and Chief Executive's not here to comment, but we have looked at economies of scale through some of our water engineering, that sort of thing in the future. So I think that gives us plenty of options. JP is...
Mr. Chair, I suppose the other person to comment, and I'm looking across at him, he's eating nuts now, is Stavros, and I think it's a case of just highlighting that we do have a number of delivery mechanisms that are either through Infracourse or CCOs or out to other organisations. So I think Stavros could probably elaborate still further on that.
Yeah, thank you, Stavros. And then I have Councillor Tapsell waiting and then Councillor Gould. So.
I'm fully aware of the angle where the submissions have come from. And the submission, I think, relates to comments we have made with regards to the long-term approach for securing engineering and operational services for the organization. And the angle has been, we are, as a council, you are responsible to provide the service, but not necessarily in doing the service. And as an example, councillors, last year when we approved the contracts for waste collection and so on, historically we used to do it all in-house, now do with external resources. In the near future, we're having some significant capital projected investment in our wastewater systems and the operation of those systems. We think we need to explore the possibility of private-public partnering, total outsourcing, design, build, operate systems, So our procurement process anticipates, and I think it's due diligence for us to explore all these issues. And I think the submitter has a particular personal view, which I recognize but don't support, that we should do certain things in one particular way. And all we're signaling here is that we will do due diligence and explore the most cost-effective and risk-averse option for this organization, to the benefit of the ratepayer.
Great explanation. Thank you, Stavros. Councillor Tapsell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, JP and Una. I just noticed there's a few empty ones on the Rotorua Lakes Council section we're looking at, but there are some good things that we are doing within Council that I think would be important to relay back to them. For example, 653, increasing te reo every year, and what we're already doing within the organisation on learning te reo Māori and also our Marae Stay welcome programs to new staff. And also on the following page, 758, maybe just explaining the difference between Baplenny Regional Council and our council. It is a very common misperception within the community, and that the library child help is not Baplenny Regional Council taking us over, it's just working within partnership. And then just the last empty one where we don't have any comments back was just the one below, 760, about us needing to focus on flooding and devastation to people's homes, and perhaps just letting them know the extensive work that our staff did do and the time that they put in to help the EdgeCom, and also the really good preparedness that we do have within our council with Linda, for example, to cater for these things. So I think there are really good things that we are doing within council that will be worth highlighting to the community that aren't aware. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tapsell. Councillor Gould.
Chairman, I'm going to also mention 758. There's a former mayoral candidate at the last election doesn't understand how local government operates. So it would be better to, words I'd use, your submission has been noted, and just leave it at that, because whatever you put down she could use to her advantage.
Thank you for that. So are there any further comments? Have we moved this one, Carol? Yep, it is moved. Any further discussion? No. So, and it's been voted on. Thank you. So, sports and recreation.
Councillors, I'll just hand over to Rob to see if he can be as efficient as Stavros and I.
Second to last page, Peter, at the bottom. Welcome, Rob. So there are a number of submissions, and did you have any prior comments before I open up for councillors?
To be honest, most of the comments explain the feedback to the submissions. We've been through the process for those, so and a number of them are supporting. So the current position that we're taking in the annual plan, so that's fine. So basically, ready to take any questions.
Do I have any, Councillor Stewart, do you have a question?
It may be in another list somewhere else, but the fantastic submission that was put in by the Ngātaha Association Football Club isn't in this list. And sorry, is it on another page?
Yeah.
Oh, have I flipped over and not?
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Yeah.
599.
599 refers to Ngātaha AFC and their submission on the improvements that they were seeking for their grounds and facilities.
And it's been reported to us so that we can do some design budgets and all that sort of thing to bring through to the LTP.
The work that they're proposing is fairly extensive.
Yes.
The first stage that we've got is part of a supply and demand investigation that we're doing on all our sports fields, which lines us into longer term planning as well. You know, have we got the right number of sports fields for the right codes in the right places? Once we've been able to complete that, then that'll identify for us, okay, do we need to be looking at further investment in particular areas for particular codes? So that would guide us for the key features that Ngātaha brought forward in their submission.
But we're not going to ignore their specific need.
No.
That will be in that supply and demand study. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The other thing is contrary to one particular sector of the community, Rob, just one question in your response to the people who are supporting the playgrounds and skate parks proposals. There's considerable community support. I've only had one negative, and they've said, well, don't forget the aquatic centre. But we didn't get a submission. Did we get a submission on the aquatic centre that it needed an upgrade? And because we've got that in train, haven't we? We've got that in hopefully bringing something forward for the LTP for the aquatic centre as well, with public-private partnership, that type of thing.
That's correct. We have got provisioning in the LTP for significant resources for an upgrade. How that upgrade happens, whether it's part of a PPP or it's philanthropic assisted process as well, and to what level, we're still going through some investigations to work out what might be a suitable public facility or a quality public facility against also what the option might be in terms of investing with a partner to make it even more than that. So that's a process that we'll be bringing back to Council before the LTP discussion.
Mr. Chairman, we've seen it's my portfolio, and thank you for your indulgence. The request on behalf of the Rotorua Little Theatre that a 30-year lease be considered to enable potential funders to support ongoing upgrades to the building. Our response: this request has currently been investigated and discussed with council partners for managing the reserve. Once this is concluded, well, in view of the decision we made yesterday in terms of a total upgrade of the Sir Howard Morrison Performing Arts Centre, wouldn't it be a bit premature that we lock ourselves into a 30-year lease for this particular organisation? Because I understood quite early on in the piece that they were one of the major parties that wanted to see the Sir Howard Morrison Performing Arts Centre upgraded. So I just wondered where we're at with that. I mean, I know that it says noted, but I think there's a little bit more behind it than maybe that should be referred to the portfolio.
Yeah, so Councillor Stewart, I think I recall the words of Councillor Hunt is that we, in terms of the Sir Howard Morrison Performing Arts Centre, we're looking far wider in terms of the user group and the arts community, the performing arts community that may have an interest in. And I guess any entity is entitled to pursue a discussion with council, come through the Ngāti Whakao Gifted Reserves Committee that you sit on and be a stakeholder in that discussion. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Rob? No. Sorry, JP, I'll add to that.
Mr. Chair, you've covered it off actually, and that's the reference we've made, is that it's going across as a discussion that we can't singularly have. It is a gifted reserves discussion, so that's why we've made that reference in the comments. But clearly, you've also highlighted our desire to sort of re-engage with all the stakeholders who might be interested in the Sir Howard Morrison Performing Arts Centre as well.
Councillor Tapsell, you have a question, followed by Councillor Gould.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Rob. I think that this sort of section here really shows really well how much work you and your team have been doing, so thank you for that. I do see that you are already, in a response to a lot of these requests, already engaging with that community or investigating options for them. But I am just a little concerned that there doesn't seem to be any set action for them, and quite often we'll be looking at it in the next annual plan budget, and I'm just being wary not to set a precedent to keep saying, okay, well, we'll look at it next year, we'll look at it next year. So is there an opportunity to give these people a time frame, as in, yes, we will try to do this within this year if possible? I'm just really trying to get some action for these small community groups that many of them aren't asking for much actually, but it will be of huge benefit to a lot of people. Just your thoughts on that. Thanks, Rob.
Without the specifics, seeing which one or which ones you're referring to, I mean, the approach that we're taking with a lot of our renewal programs, and I think you'll see that with the way that there's been quite a bit of support, is that we're taking a much more engaging approach with the communities to work out what it is they want for us to do in their places and spaces, rather than the old school way of we'll just go and build a playground and hopefully it'll meet the needs of the community. We'll see that we're doing Rotorua playgrounds and things like that. We've been working with a lot of the lakes communities around boat ramps and other facilities in the areas through the community boards. So in quite a few of the things that are in here are actually in train. Hamrana Reserve, we're working with that community. We know that the LTP has got it funded in year 4 or year 1 of the new LTP, so we're already working with them because we know that that's going to be a long process to actually make sure engagement takes 12 to 18 months before we want to actually start spending some money. So if there's any specific items, I'm happy to address that, but I think the general concept we're taking now is a far more interactive approach with these communities about what they want in their reserves and areas.
Thank you, Councillor Gould, and then Councillor Stewart. Come back to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. 750 with the skate park. Have we got, with the report stating there, you're looking at refer to the long-term plan process. Long-term plan process is 2018 to 2028. Have we got some funding in this year for that particular skate park, or can we make it for early in the long-term plan for 2018 2028?
So I'll pass to Rob on that.
The current design work that we've been doing with the skate park, we've been doing under our operational budget. And that's not been a significant spend. But the situation is that we now need to get into the engagement phase and make sure that what we are seeking to do there meets the needs of the users and the best needs of the surrounding community as well. So that will line us up for how much we need to spend starting in the next LTP. So we are still, we'll need to be signalling that by November, December as to what that might be. And at that stage we'll have that engagement picture completed, so we'll be in a far better situation to understand what's required, and we can do some refining of any design work as we lead up to the next LTP.
Rob, I had a question, and it's on the second to last submission, 799, regarding rubbish, imported rubbish at a market, and our response is we're just limited to the booking of the space. And just with a destination management focus and our desire to be viewed as a a more upmarket destination. Is that all we do, or can just anyone come and book that public space if they wish to, if they're a community group, or do we run some sort of ruler over it? And I wonder if that could be included into the response.
It's a very interesting question. Any lease of our public space simply needs to fit within the terms of the reserve management plan, and those reserve management plans don't really have the sort of quality type of thing that you would be talking about. It's for a purpose. These particular spaces are also part of Ngāti Whakaue gifted land, so again those leases require discussion with that Ngāti Whakaue gifted lands group. I suppose it would be part of a management planning refinement process perhaps if we were looking to try and take that tack, but we haven't got that in there at the moment.
Thank you for that, and I think it might be helpful to, in the response to the submitter, include that it fits within the existing reserve management plan, and that just might help with the response, I think. Yeah. Councillor Sturt, you?
Further to that, I think it's a quality control measure, and I think it wouldn't hurt to have a discussion with the leasee. She's pretty receptive to that sort of feedback. The other thing, Rob, you mentioned that we're engaging in response to Councillor Gould's question. We're engaging with the major stakeholders and users in terms of skate park. Likewise, the people who came in from Touch made some really good points in terms of the positioning of toilets and or electricity at Puringa Park. We will likewise engage with Touch and with soccer to ensure we actually meet what the need is, rather than us just plonking a toilet here or plonking a toilet there. So we will work with those people. And can we say that to them, please?
Yes, we will, and we will work with them, and yes, we will say that to them. There's probably a variety of other users as well that will go out there and make sure that we capture existing users, and as part of the supply and demand, we might have identified possible future users, so we'll make sure that we cover all our bases there.
Okay. Councillor Hunt, this might be the final one.
You may have covered this, Rob, but just back to the markets again. Could we also add just that two of the markets, and name them, are council-run markets, the Thursday night market and the Sunday market, that the Saturday market is a Rotary-run market, and name the Rotary Club that runs that, and that this is a private or community-run market, so that, because many people just think, there's markets happening, and they assume they're either all ours or they're all independent. So I think that spelling out which ones we specifically run ourselves and those that are run by independent community groups may help. And it's a subjective comment, because while many people may think what they sell is rubbish, other people flock there, and so it's a challenging thing. But I think for those markets we run ourselves, we do have a quality that we aspire to, and we're continually aiming to do that. So hopefully, again, people are voting with their checkbooks and their feet and attending those that sell the sort of products that they're interested in.
Thank you, Councillor Sturt. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Kumar, are you going to second the... Councillor Bentley seconded. All right, so I'll put the Sport and Recreation group of responses to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Carried. So, thank you, councillors. That brings us to the end of the spreadsheet of responses, and I'll just ask Thomas to recap on the earlier discussion and where to on the 29th of June when we come to the annual plan. Sorry, Councillor Kemp, missed you there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to remind you that we were going to refer to the 52 submissions that have been totally ignored, being those submissions that are against the rate increase and have been omitted from the spreadsheet.
Just through the chair, what I think there's an opportunity to do at the moment is Thomas will actually provide a bit of a summary as to where we are at the moment with regards to the deliberations to date. Obviously, you have the submissions that you're referring to in mind, and at the end of the discussion that Thomas has, there is an opportunity to discuss those issues such as rating levels, debt levels and so on. But I think it's worthwhile, Thomas, this gives you a bit of a summary, which is really a heads up as to where we've landed, and that will then give you the opportunity to debate or to dialogue on how you wish to set expectations as we go forward.
Thank you, Jeff. So councillors, just bringing you back to this morning with regards to the spreadsheets that I showed you. So following now the deliberations and the decisions that we were made, we've shifted from a position whereby with the proposed rate increase of 3.8% and borrowing 5.5 million, those decisions to reduce the spend on the Sir Howard Morrison and increase the rural seals has effectively reduced the proposed borrowing down to 3.8 million. Now, as some councillors have pointed out, you can balance that between increasing, decreasing debt, as well as also increasing and decreasing rates going forward. What I will do is just briefly give you an example to think about, because obviously that's a decision that will come about later this month with the adoption of the annual plan. A $2 million reduction in the rate take proposed would also mean that the following year you wouldn't also not get that 2 million, and the following year and the following year. So that is the impact of reducing your forward revenues every year by that same amount. And obviously without compounding it and inflating it and doing so forth, over a 10-year period, that has about a $20 million impact with regards to cash that the organisation wouldn't collect, and through rates as an example. That's 20 million that could be used for debt retirement, could be 20 million to fund new capital projects, as an example. On the flip side is that if you chose, therefore, to leave borrowings as they were and not reduce them by the 2 million that we're talking about, but if you reduce the borrowing instead by 2 million, that has an impact just on this 1 year. So you would increase the borrowings by 2 million, and that has a compounding effect every year of $100,000 interest expense. So roughly $1 million of interest over that 10 years as well. And therefore that decision has a $3 million impact over that 10 years. And so you can see the stark difference between reducing your revenue in year one by 2 million and what that means over 10 years versus borrowing that 2 million in year one, and the impact of that has over 10 years. Now that is very simple. And what we'll do is to make sure that we have a model available for you at the time of decision that clearly reflects and shows that.
If I can just add to that, and Councillor Sturt, my apologies, I know Thomas went over this this particular picture earlier on, and perhaps Thomas could just briefly for you, either in a moment or alternatively after the meeting, just go through what effectively this means. What Thomas has said is actually of critical importance from our financing policy. Our financing policy is really set in such a way that we're not geared at all any longer to use borrowing as a way of supporting operational cost. If you were to cut revenue, that would effectively drive increased borrowing. That borrowing would be then, of course, offsetting operational cost. So what we would be returning back to is an environment where we've got large increases of potential debt over time and cross-subsidisation occurring. Now that would be directly against the direction that you have previously set with regards to our finance policy. So the recommendation to you, which is contained really in summary form in this table, is that the revenue lines, the rate lines become unaltered effectively as a result of all of the decisions that you've made to date. The expenditure lines really also remain unaltered. The things right down at the bottom, which are the capital expenditure lines, you've reduced the cost of the Howard Morrison Centre by $2 million for this project within this financial year, and you've added $300,000 in. these are all items that directly go to determine our end-of-year debt position. And so our recommendation as staff is that that is the appropriate way to treat the changes that you've actually made with regards to your deliberations. So the strong recommendation is to not look at changes in rating level, but to look at changes in debt level, which drives long-term debt retirement, which is the direction which you've already given us.
So I have Councillor Sturt, then Councillor Kent.
Thank you for that update, Mr. CEO. However, in front of me, it shows we, based on the revenue levels and the expenditure levels, notwithstanding any capital expenditure, we are budgeting for a surplus of $8 million. Okay.
Sorry, Councillor, and I'll just, before you carry on, I'll just walk you through this. So, from a profit and loss perspective, that is an $8 million surplus. But
Yes.
you have to add back depreciation, which is a non-cash expense, which is that next step. You then add on the property sales target of $1 million. And so what we're saying is that we're generating $34 million worth of free cash flows from our operations to help
CapEx.
to fund CapEx, loan repayments and so forth. The challenge that the organisation has got is that we're proposing to spend 39.5, so we're having to borrow the difference of 5.5. Now, when you reduce that 39.5 down to 37.8, obviously the borrowing difference is 3.8 million. And so therefore there is that direct reduction in the amount required to borrow.
Okay, so the next question is, when do we look at the capital expenditure program to match it with the cash flow available for CapEx? Because I thought there was a clear direction from this council that we did not want borrowing to carry on. I mean, we have done nothing in terms of looking at what the capital expenditure of 27 million is programmed and where savings can be made. I mean, we made savings on the Sir Howard Morrison. Well, we haven't made a saving, we actually deferred it to the next year. That's basically what. The only extra expenditure is the 300,000 for the rural seal extension, and some minors overs and unders, and that by the by. So I wondered when we were going to examine that. I mean, we've got a lot of money under renewals, but so improvements to what's LOS?
Improvements to level
So
of service.
no extra projects or new items of capital expenditure other than the Sir Howard Morrison Performing Arts Centre and the Rural Seal Extension. So there's no new items of capital, it's all renewals or increasing the level of service.
Yeah, so Councillor, we'll have to go back to probably the workshops in February, March, where we did go through this in detail. We agreed that there were some pressures coming in from with regards to the refresh of Rotorua 2030, with regards to those big moves and those key projects. We did go through that in detail with regards to what those extra projects were. One of them was obviously the work required on the Sir Howard Morrison Performing Arts Centre. Others included things like Long Mile Road master planning upgrade, lakefront development, Salford Point, quite a significant amount on sports facilities upgrade, etc., etc.
I just wanted to make sure that we had done that, and you've assured me as the Chief Financial Officer that we have. I accept that. And I accept what's up there based on deferring the Sir Howard Morrison 2 million to next year and retaining the level of rates revenue and the other revenue levels. We'd be crazy to drop the revenue levels because we're not spending that $2 million this year, because we're going to need the $2 million next year, aren't we?
Correct, and I'll just, obviously we're advocating quite strongly down this path, and the reason why I'm advocating quite strongly is because we've been here before, and this graph shows where we've been here before. So if the council wishes to reduce rates revenue by 2 million as an example and leave borrowing where it is, that graph where our debt doubled in the space of 8 years is effectively, that's where we were. Now, it's probably on a different scale, but those were years where we chose to borrow and we chose to keep our rates lower than where they needed to be. And that's the position where it got to. So the reason why we're advocating so strongly is I don't want to repeat the mistakes of the past. So.
I could just summarise that. So the current annual plan, as it's presented at this point, is set, the rates increase level is set to cover the services and costs of the functioning of this organisation as has been worked through both in the workshops and on the basis of the submissions that you've received. What that provides is the debt profile that you're looking at within this picture, where over that 2018 to 2025 years, you will see a retirement and overall reduction in debt. If you made the decision without cutting associated costs somehow or other to reduce income, you would be changing the profile that you're seeing here quite significantly to increase debt. And the strong advice that we're providing to you is that would certainly be against the financing policy that you have given us.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. And it's not only your advice. There are a number of submitters that said we needed to reduce debt and restrain debt. But Councillor Kent, you want to have a different view?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The argument that you've put forward to go on ratcheting rates is on the premise that the public out there will go on funding whatever it is you want to do ad infinitum. And sorry, that is not the case. We have got 52 submissions here that have been totally ignored by this council, not even appearing on the spreadsheets as to what we're considering or how we're going to respond to them. All of which saying we can't afford it. Cut your cloth to actually suit your income, not ratchet your income to suit whatever it is you want to spend. And I'd like to just read you a very short submission, which I think sums it up very, very succinctly. So submission number 671 from John Edmonds. It says, I'm against your proposed rate increase. It has to stop somewhere. Rates keep going up and people's remuneration isn't keeping pace with your rate hikes. Ratepayers can't keep up with the pace of your increases. Many have reached saturation point and can't keep managing this ever-burgeoning debt. When people can't pay, you penalise them with an additional 10%. I would like to buy a whole lot of things to make my home life a lot easier. Either I have to save or do without. It's high time the council adopted a similar stance and realised that we are not here as your private bank to pander to your every whim. It's time you took a reality check and acknowledged something has to give. I suggest you visit some of your proposals and put them on hold until you have saved some money to implement them. If you can't do that, then don't do them. That, in a nutshell, says to me where we're at. The long-term plan said 2.5% rate increase. I actually voted against that because I think that's excessive too. I believe that this council can actually cut its expenditure further, and I think there are a lot of things that can be deferred or planned later in the piece. I see that graph there, and I immediately say to myself, okay, but how are we getting that debt reduction that's there? If you actually look at the long-term plan, the only reason the debt reduction is taking place in the end of those periods is because there's no capital works planned. Are you telling me that when we get there, there aren't going to be capital works? Of course there will be, but they weren't in the long-term plan. And we're going into a new long-term planning process coming up very shortly, which is going to change it all anyway. So actually to try and put the argument that we've got to have this rate increase because the long-term is going to mean that we're going to be out of pocket is an absolute nonsense. It's only going to be we're out of pocket if you go on spending more than you've got. I believe that we should seriously be responding to these people who have put in their submissions saying that this council continues to overspend, continues to have rates.
Mr. Chairman, I don't want to listen to Councillor Kent raving on. It is a rave. It is a rave. You're not the only one. You're not the only one.
So, Councillor Kent, you've had your say and you've made your point, and I understand where Councillor Rotorua Tate's coming from. Yesterday, you argued just as passionately to increase an expenditure line on CapEx. So, I propose that we frame up a resolution that endorses the proposal, the recommendation from staff for the development of the long-term plan, the annual plan for our meeting on the 29th of June. That includes the changes made in the deliberations of the past 2 days, and proceeds with a rate increase as included in the discussion document that went out. So if we could work up a motion, I'll give the staff a couple of minutes to work up a motion along those lines, and then I'll open up to other councillors as to whether we are happy to give that guidance to staff, because I think we need to draw this discussion to a close, and we can have it again and vote one way or another on the 29th of June. Councillor Gould first, and then Councillor Gould.
Mr Chairman, thank you for your comments just now, but do we know what the proposed rate increase is? Because we've taken back a few projects or deferred them, like the Sir Howard Morrison Centre. Yet we've gone out to the public saying there's a possible rate increase of 3.8.
You weren't listening, Mark.
Yeah, there was no... Look, I accept one statement, Councillor Kent, that you make, is that the submitters do deserve a response in respect of their view on rate increases, just as the submitters who said we don't want to see an increase in debt deserve a response. So I'll accept that. But I think it behoves us, after 2 days of sitting here and working through the requests for additional expenditure and the responses to the discussion document, that we have a... so we'll just pause for a couple of seconds while we have a recommendation to debate. Yeah.
So I think in trying to capture what you're asking, what we're saying is that the assumptions and framework that was actually put out in the consultation document is what it is that you're adopting, subject to the amendments which you've moved throughout the deliberations process. That's effectively where you're landing.
So moved Councillor Stewart. Yep. Do I have a seconder for that? Seconded Councillor Bentley. Councillor Stewart, did you want to speak to it?
Notwithstanding Councillor Kent's rant, there is, and I respect your intervention, Councillor Rotorua Tate, there is a significant sector within this community that are hurting, facing rent increases, etc., etc. And I suspect, based on what the banks are doing at the moment, are going to be facing mortgage increases, interest rate increases. So I also take on board the submissions that were made from those people. Most of those people are on fixed incomes, and they can't knock on the government's door and say, I want another $18 a year to pay my, or $18 a quarter to pay my rates. The other misnomer, Mr. Chairman, is, and I think we need to make it clear, that if we're going to attack and reduce debt, we either have to increase rates to pay the debt, or we have to sell off assets and retire debt from the sale of those assets. I think that also needs to be made abundantly clear, because there's a lot of people who have made submissions, the debt's too high, reduce your debt. Well, we need to explain to them what the mechanisms are to reduce that debt. I mean, you can't have the levels of service that you've got and expect them to be maintained or enhanced if we don't have these periodical increases in rates. I have some empathy with what Councillor Kent has. We did signal a 2.5% rate increase, And it's obvious that some sectors of the community don't, whilst they have accepted that in the past, don't accept going above that. So, I mean, I think what we've presented is the best mix. I mean, other councils have put rates 9, 10, 12, 7, 6%. We're 3.8. We fell into that trap under Councillor McVicker's chairmanship a while ago of not putting rates up when we should have, and we then funded services by debt. And as the CEO and the CFC have said, we don't want to go down that path again, otherwise that graph will go up expeditiously. I agree with you that there are, the graph is a little bit misleading because it doesn't have an input of capital spend on that, but in the 10-year plan we have got some significant capital spends, particularly in sewerage, that are signalled in there. So, I mean, let's not be deluded. The debt levels are going to increase over time, and with a downsize in the last 4 years of that 10-year program, which I support also. So, based on what we've had in front of us, Mr. Chairman, I'd like my colleagues unanimously to support that there will be alterations and amendments during the year. The goal is the 3.8. 3.8 was what we had gone to the public with. And I don't want to downplay those people who said they can't afford it. But there's another thing that the uptake isn't high is the rates rebate scheme. The rates rebate scheme is indexed to inflation, and I know there's a lot of our people on fixed incomes who do not take advantage of that. In fact, they don't even know about it. So maybe there's a selling job, because it doesn't cost us as a city money, it costs the government. It's a government subsidy of $500 or nearly $600. So I think there's that opportunity. We need to also sell that, the benefits of that.
Thank you, Councillor Sturt, and we will get to redebate this on the 29th when a document's put in front of us for approval. Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just like to suggest an alternative. The alternative is we've cut 1.7 out of the annual plan budget. If we reduced our rating by $1 million, we would be going out with a 2.65% rate increase, not a 3.8% rate increase. We've included in that 2.65, we've included the extra expenditure on the rural seal. And we are going into a long-term plan process that can easily accommodate any adjustment required for that $1 million of reduced revenue. That is the alternative.
So I think Thomas has commented earlier on the implications of reducing revenue. Does anyone else want to speak to the motion that's on the table? Councillor Gould, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With the proposed motion and the Rotorua sewage upgrade in the next couple of years, is that going to affect it much? Or is that are we going to have to take that into account when we deliberate on the 29th of June?
The proposed wastewater treatment upgrade? No, that'll have an impact in future years. It's already programmed into our long-term plan. However, we are aware that it's likely going to cost a little bit more than where we originally planned. So the work that we've been doing in the past about reducing our debt and not having the levels of debt that we anticipated in the long-term plan creates the headroom to be able to absorb something like that. So reducing revenue, as you say, as I said before, would have the flow-on effect of making our ability to absorb that in the future more difficult.
We've told the public that it's going to cost approximately $30 million. Are you saying it's going up how much by?
I'm not saying anything because that work still hasn't been completed with regards to the final costing of that project, so I can't give you a figure there, Councillor. Nice try.
I'll just ask the Chief Executive to comment on the second part of the motion that's before us.
Councillors, and I'll pass to JP in a moment, we've just taken the liberty of adding a second part to that resolution. It's pointing to those submissions that Councillor Kent alluded to with respect to rates increases. What we're undertaking to do is for you is to just to do a summary and bring those back to you. What I want to reiterate though is that you've already got all of those submissions, so all submissions have been made available to you. The fact is that anything that's been left off has been left off the summary document as opposed to being omitted to be not provided to you. So you've had all and had the opportunity to read and to digest all submissions that have been received.
And I guess the ultimate response to those submitters is when we strike the rate.
And Councillor, that's probably the point that's so important. You know, in the past we've tended to do that because you can't take a decision on references to keep rates up, happy with rates, take rates down until you've actually made the cumulative decisions all the way through. So we had done that of identifying those ones because actually the answers are your cumulative decision-making process. So that's how we've done it in the past. We tended to leave those to the end. So it is important that you see them as a summary as well, and we'll bring that to the total picture of your final decision-making.
Final comment, Councillor Sturt, and then I intend to put the motion.
Just on process, Mr Chair.
Yeah.
I do get an assurance from staff that each of the submitters will be responded to.
Absolutely, and the mover and the second are happy with the amendment to the motion, so I'll put that motion. All those in favour, say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. So that brings us to the end of the meeting. Thank you, councillors.